Thank you. I had an experience not too long ago, very recently, coming out of contrast with my wife. And before that, I woke up and I heard my inner being say, get a job. I haven't been working for a long time. I mean, I have my projects and they're going well and all that, but I haven't had a regular day job. And I resisted that idea to get a job because I really wanted to focus on my projects.
Are you sure it was your inner being or was it your mother?
It could have been. Well, see, this is why I'm bringing this up.
In other words, were you daydreaming or nightmaring?
It could have been either or. So that's why I'm bringing it up. So,
well, you kind of got to know.
I know.
What influence you're under before, and so what other things were happening? In other words, if there was conflict and that sort of thing, there's a very high probability that you were receiving from a different pile than source energy.
There was a lot of conflict between my wife and I about me getting a job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where do you think that information came from? Do you think it was inspired from source, or did it come out of a different pile?
Possibly from a different pile, and maybe that's why I resisted it.
Uh-huh.
So I was...
Because your inner being doesn't say
get a
things
job.
like get a job.
Got it.
Especially not with that tone. Get a job.
Well, it was more like I came out of this dream and I said, should I get a job? And it said yes. That's how it went. Anyway, so what I want to do, Abraham.
So before you go further, we just want to clarify that you are often in the receiving mode. You just want to know what you're receiving from. And how you're going to know that? By what came before, by what your mood or attitude has been. In other words, this is the whole point of this. We say, get out ahead of it so that you know where you're getting the information, yes?
Yes, but the thing is that this whole job thing has been a point of contention with me because I've resisted getting a job because I don't want that kind of thing. And it's turned out what I do want is I want a big pile of money, but I don't want to have to work to get it. I'm not the only one who has this belief, I think, or this desire. And so one of the things I've been doing around law of attraction to kind of exert or demonstrate to myself my mastery of it is this desire. And it's really strong. But let me explain what happened, though. This is really
Before you go further, we
okay,
just want
sure.
to stick one little thing in about the sticks. When you pick up the stick that says job, very high probability that your dominant vibration is going to be on the unwanted end of it.
Yes.
And so what you activate is around those things.
Yes.
Where if you don't start with that subject, but you start with something that feels good to you, then you can sort of make an end run around it.
Here's what happened.
Really?
Yes. So you talk about how contrast can be beneficial. Don't underestimate the benefit of contrast. And the contrast between my wife and I had gotten so great. I was feeling like I was under a great pressure. And I went out on a walk and I was thinking, how do I get out from under this? What would Abraham do if they were in my shoes? And I said, well, I thought of a thought that would make me feel a certain way. And the words that came to my mind were words like triumph and satisfaction and ecstasy. And I put myself in that place, and about, not immediate, but like about a minute and a half after I did that, Abraham, the word of this company came to mind. And so I ended up at this beach, and I sat down and I meditated, and then I got the impulse to look up this company on the internet.
Now, at this point, where did it feel like the inspiration was coming from?
It's feeling much more like
source.
Yes, like source. Well, it had to have been because of what happened next.
Really?
Yes. So I got my phone out and looked up this company, and this company was hiring. It just so happened it had a hiring event the next Thursday. The next Thursday came around, and I went to this hiring event, and without an interview, I got hired. It was like lickety-split, really quick.
This is what we're talking about, the difference in the leverage.
Yes.
The difference between the atomic bomb and the firecracker.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I want to be careful about my language because I'm clear of the two ends of the following stick I'm about to describe. I am moving towards a life experience that does not include my wife, because that fills me with joy when I think about that. And on that Thursday, I had been inspired to go to this apartment complex. And I went to this apartment complex, and they had a vacancy, an open apartment. And I talked to the manager, and long story short, I have this apartment now, and it's only 20 minutes from this place where I'm going to be working. So it's all working out. Several months ago, I listened to an Abraham video where you were talking with a guy who wants the same type of pile of money that I want, but he didn't want to work a job. And you said that it would be better for that person if they got a job as a bridge to realizing their pile of money, because they had run out of money that would last them long enough to get to the pile of money they wanted.
Well, it's all about where you stand and the path of least resistance from where you are to where you want to be.
Yes. So this job came to me, it felt like the path of least resistance, because I was really resisting.
Oh, it was way a path of least resistance.
Yes.
It was a path of no resistance.
To many things.
It was a path of no resistance. We want to talk about something, however, because you don't have to jump into action right away, and it's usually best if you don't. But we want you to consider this. The pressure that you felt, mostly from your conflict with your wife. So now think about how this is all wrapping around together, how the path of least resistance that you remember us discussing with someone else was, you can't believe what we're saying like you did about getting under the influence of source and allowing something like that to unfold, but you really need money. The path of least resistance is for you to do something that lets the money flow to you. That's essentially what that video was that you watched. Yeah. And our message to him wasn't that you will forever be employed or that you will ever have a job. It's just that priming the pump, doing something that releases the tension and the trauma of not enough money is what's necessary to do. Now, we would always rather that it be a vibrational journey, but in the grips of bondage or in the grips of poverty, you just got to do what you got to do, and what you got to do has to be all right. In other words, all that you have access to has to be enough. And if you can let all that you have access to be enough, then things will start loosening up for you until eventually that person on the video could be like you, being able to distinguish the difference between get a job and something else dropping in. That's what this whole conversation today has been about, is about you getting out ahead of it so that you realize where your information is coming from. So you realize when true power is at your fingertips and when you've got yourself sort of blocked off from it. But the other thing that we want to touch on lightly is this. In the same way that you resisted the idea of a job, but you are able to make a clear distinction with all of us here between the job that get a job meant and the job you were hired. You got a job, but you feel very exhilarated about that, where you weren't exhilarated about a job. Are you following us?
Yes.
In other words, it's still the same subject, but it feels different because of the end of the stick it is. And we just want you to realize that just like the job could feel not good or good, the wife can too. So don't be too quick to let some momentum that you know is obvious contrast momentum be the motivating factor that causes you to take some. Make sure that you're under the influence of source before you follow the impulse. That's all we're asking.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's the other thing I wanted to talk about, actually. So I've been really thinking about the path of least resistance relative to my marriage.
We know you have, but we just want to ask you.
Please, yeah.
Do you think about it when you're in a bind, when you're in an argument, or do you think about it when you're blissed out and in love with life? In other words,
both.
All right.
Both times.
All right.
And there's a preponderance of I can't remember which one you mentioned first, but there's a preponderance of the
resistance side.
Resistance.
It
There's
is.
a preponderance of that, for sure.
In human form, there's a preponderance of that in everything about life.
I
There just is.
do not disagree with that.
Because there's just stuff that you got to do and you don't want to do all of it. And it takes a little while for you to make the best of it until it gets bester and bester and bester and bester and bester.
It seems like it's getting worser and worser and worser and worser.
Well, that's because you're on that end of the stick rather than on that end of the stick. what you give your attention to is what comes to you. And there are not enough rules or requirements or regulations or signs or chains on the doors. In other words, you just can't hold back something that it's like you're calling it with your attention and then trying to hold it back with your reasoning. Come to me, this thing that is not allowed by the hotel management. Yeah. So how do you clean that up? Well, you clean it up by having enough discomfort that you realize you've got something to clean up, and then you go to work on the only thing that works, which is doing something about your own vibration. You dream it into place. You segment intended it into place. You don't try to prevent it into place. That doesn't prevent it. It calls it.
So one day, I wanted to strangle my wife. Really, I wanted to. After she had said something that did not match who I was. And that night in bed...
Before you go further, she touched a sore spot.
Yeah, she said something that was not accurate about me, that I'm sensitive about.
Well,
Yes.
she touched a sore spot.
Yes.
Remember earlier we said, people say I'm sensitive, when really what they are is susceptible. And why is someone susceptible? Esther is susceptible to you all going in the back hallway, because you keep going in the back hallway and she keeps having to explain you to management. And so when someone touches a sore spot, the solution isn't to get them to stop touching the sore spot. The solution is to not have a sore spot. Because if you got a sore spot, somebody's going to touch it. And eventually, a person will touch it who has never touched a sore spot before. We're not kidding. Men who have never beaten wives, if you've been beaten enough and you believe that you feel vulnerable, somebody who's never beaten anyone will beat you up. It's just the way the law of attraction is. Someone will be susceptible to that vibration. Hard to hear or make sense to you?
It makes sense. I know why this is called the hot seat now.
Yeah.
So I don't think you're saying I should stay with my wife.
We're not.
Right.
But what we are saying is, given what we feel, given the conversation that we've had, we know for sure that your influence isn't out of complete cooperation with what's in your vortex either. Here's how it goes. When you're tuned in, tapped in, turned on, and impulses begin occurring to you, those impulses lead to wonderful things. And it takes you a little while to trust that you're in that mode. It takes you a little while to start hearing the impulses, and it takes you a little while to become a master at knowing for sure what wavelength you're on and acting in timing. There are some people that have pretty good balance, but we don't encourage you to get on that line that's going across the Grand Canyon or across Niagara Falls. You might not be that good for that. And so we're just asking that you steady yourself a little more until you are absolutely certain that you're following an impulse from source. Because if there's any equivocation in your vibration, then it will be a rougher ride than it needs to be. Because there's so much harmony that's in your vortex. You're right when you say we're not advocating one way or the other, but we are advocating for good relationships. You know, a relationship is eternal. That relationship is going to be where you last left it. And so if you are tuned into source energy when you go separate ways, then that relationship won't bite you in the ankles for the rest of your life. But when you leave out of bitterness or even out of physical personal wisdom or out of it's not you, it's me kind of stuff, it just bites you around every corner, and the next relationship is infested with it. And then it's resistance that you got to overcome in the next relationship, you see.